Well, the South African National Defence Union's PECIGRIF says the departure of the United Nations peacekeepers from the Democratic Republic of Congo have left South African soldiers at risk. The city press is reporting that the SANDF soldiers deployed to the volatile region are working under unbearable conditions. Over 600 members are forced to share 6 pit toilets, have no kitchen to prepare their meals, and also don't have access to doctors and nurses due to a lack of funds.
The deployments that South Africa has been doing over the past 2 decades was really, as far as the DRC is concerned, under the auspices of the UN. Now, of course, the UN was sent backing by the DRC government, and so a lot of the support that was provided by the UN in terms of equipment, infrastructure, and so forth in these bases has been withdrawn. And it means that South Africa's troops has been deployed there under circumstances where they now have to set up a base from anew, and also with, of course, an offensive set of mindset, not a defensive one, as the bases were usually structured. And that is something that I think is quite a learning curve for the Defence Force, because we haven't really practiced that, if I understand the situation correctly. And you know, what you don't practice regularly, you're not going to execute very well.
PECIGRIF is calling for resources to be deployed to the soldiers in the DRC urgently.
Well, the immediate task should be to get a hold of a freight aircraft that can carry freight to the members, especially the essential things, to dispatch medical military personnel so that a field hospital at least can be erected, to dispatch field kitchens so that there can be decent facilities to prepare food for these soldiers. And it's really just a question of getting everything together and getting it over there. The problem is we're at the end of a financial year. The money is completely depleted in the department, but hopefully with a new cycle starting, someone will be able to make a plan. But we'll definitely, as from Sandu's side, engage with the Ministry of Defence and the Chief SANDF to see how one can get to solutions and how quickly one can get to it. We are greatly concerned about our members.
Well, for more on this, we're now joined by defence analyst Dean Wingrin. Dean, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. Looking at that report from City Press, what's your takeaway from that article?
Well, it certainly paints a bleak picture of the Defence Force's current mission in the DRC and its set up and logistics structure. And although the nature of these articles will tend to be a little bit negative or sensationalist, I think the underlying sort of items in that article is true. And it does show the weakness of the Defence Force logistics and planning, and a lot of that comes from the severe underfunding of the Defence Force, in that they cannot afford the training exercises, the equipment, and the support that they need for missions such as this so far from the country's borders.
Yeah, and looking at the ratio, the report indicates that when it comes to toilets, at least being made available to soldiers, is that ordinarily it should be 50 to 1 toilet. So 50 soldiers would use 1 toilet. Here we only have 6 toilets, meaning that they're short of another 6.
Well, it's a strange situation, because normally when you set up a base, you'll have the senior sergeant major, a non-commissioned officer, who'll be responsible for the sort of housekeeping type of activities at the base. And we're not talking about ablution facilities, brick and mortar type.
Yeah.
Soldiers deploy, and it's at the initial stages of setting up a new camp on an empty piece of land. The toilet facilities will be a little bit rudimentary, and there will be, and it shouldn't be too much of a problem to build field latrines on that facility. Obviously, with a mix of male and females deployed, it will be a little bit complicated in setting up the field latrines, but I don't believe this is not insurmountable problem, and it should be fairly easy to sort out.
Yeah. What about the budget for this deployment? Because earlier this year, in February actually, in February when the Minister of Defence was asked about this deployment, this is what she had to say. She said that currently there is no budget that has been made available for this deployment. However, though, they are waiting for money from the National Treasury. I guess that money has still not, that the SANDF has still not received this particular money. But why would we have this particular deployment on such an urgent basis, knowing very well that there is no budget?
Well, that's a very good question. And the President, in his letter to Parliament advising of this mission from December last year, stated that this mission is budgeted for 2.4 billion rand until December this year. And that's made up of equally the cost of goods and services as well as the cost of employees, salaries to the soldiers. Now, he said that he would be making representations to Treasury to fund this, that the funding would not come out of the Defence Force's existing budget. And now it's over 4 months later, we've been through a whole new budget, and in fact, we're now in a brand new financial year, and this mission is still underfunded. And not only underfunded, but it's not funded. Yep. And this is now putting huge pressure on the Defence Force because they cannot say no to the Commander-in-Chief, the President of South Africa, for this mission. And so the money for this mission has to come from somewhere, and that's the existing Defence Force budget, which is already severely underfunded. And this then leads to shortcuts. It leads to certain equipment and items that cannot be funded. And you're relying on other countries for such vital tasks as logistics transport. The DRC said that they would transport the troops and equipment from South Africa because South Africa does not have the airlift capability to do this. And the DRC, with only one or two large aircraft capable of doing this, just doesn't have the capacity itself, which means then South Africa may have to go out to a private company to transport the equipment, and it just doesn't have the money for that.
Yeah, because also the other question, Dean, is who's reimbursing South Africa for all of this? Sure, this is a SADC mission, but who's reimbursing South Africans, considering that with the MONUSCO mission, the United Nations MONUSCO mission, there would be reimbursements that come from the United Nations. So this time around, considering that it is a SADC mission, is there any reimbursement that South Africa will be getting?
Precisely. The UN mission, South Africa gets reimbursed for its for salaries and for the use of equipment at set rates, pretty much set rates per hour. And provided South Africa's paperwork is up to scratch, the UN would refund South Africa, which is actually could be to the benefit of South Africa because that is what actually funded items such as the Royal attack helicopter for use in the DRC. We've seen now that the Royal is no longer operational as much of South Africa's Air Force other aircraft. They've now been sent on an unfunded mission to the DRC for this new mission. And there's no clarity as to who and how this is being funded or as well as refunded. I believe SADC itself has said that they may refund some of the costs, but it's just a very small, minuscule little bit of the overall expenditure that could potentially be refunded. And this is leaving a very big hole in South Africa's budget, and it does not augur well for the future of the Defence Force in able to sustain a mission such as this.
Yeah. Considering the budget constraints, considering the issues around the logistical challenges, and also around equipment, would you say that our SANDF soldiers, all 600 of them, are actually vulnerable, considering also the incident that happened on, what was it, the 14th of February, with that mortar that had exploded?
That's correct. And about 2 weeks ago, 2 other soldiers were also injured in another incident. And there's a unsigned, sort of undocumented social compact between the soldiers and the government, in that the soldiers are willing to put their lives at risk for the good of the country when they're sent on a mission such as this. And the government, for its part, must fully support those soldiers with equipment and other support. And in this instance, it appears that the soldiers are willing to put their lives at risk, but the government is not coming to the party in fully supporting those soldiers. And they are definitely at risk, and a very high risk too, in that they're not being supported enough in the DRC. And considering that there's still a mission in Mozambique that's due to wind down in the next 3 to 4 months, and hopefully the plan was that some of those troops and equipment could then go to the DRC. But even then, the equipment that's in Mozambique is also incredibly old, difficult to maintain, and it's very doubtful what type of equipment, which was already underfunded and under-equipped in Mozambique, can actually go to the DRC. And of course, how do you get it there?
Yeah. Just finally, Dean, we were told that there was going to be a board of inquiry to look into the deaths of the 2 soldiers, the initial 2 soldiers who died. Do you think that that board of inquiry would be able to deal with, as part of its terms of reference, for instance, around the decision that led into this particular deployment, considering the logistical challenges and the budget constraints? And I also ask this on the basis that here, as we've indicated, we're speaking about South African soldiers, and there is the head of the soldiers in the country would be the president of the country. The commander-in-chief of the country is the president of the country. So with such an inquiry, also look into the decision that was taken by the president to sign off on the soldiers to be deployed.
As far as I'm aware, this is a military board of inquiry, and I think their terms of reference will be very much restricted to that particular incident and the events, the direct events that led up to that incident. And the deployment decision itself is more a political decision, and I fear that would be outside the remit of that board of inquiry, and to be left to, I suppose, the opposition parties to press the commander-in-chief for further information as to why he decided to send troops and continue troops to go to the DRC and to wind down a mission facing the Islamic State right on the borders of South Africa and Mozambique. In an ideal world, you'd have both, but unfortunately, the Defence Force in its current state just cannot maintain 2 external deployments at once.
Thank you so much for your time. That is Defence Analyst Dean Wingrin, and we'll continue to try and get a hold of the South African National Defence Force, speak to the department and see what their take is on that article in the City Press.